Welcome to the Irish Pagan School podcast. Your hosts are authors and co-founders of the Irish Pagan School here in County Waterford, Ireland, Laura O'Brien and Jon O'Sullivan. Fáilte.
Is Cú Chulainn a tragic hero? Well, Daithí agus fáilte. Hi, hello and welcome. Jon O'Sullivan, the Irish Pagan School here. And this is a question that is not easily answered, for all that we start our traditional responses with ni answer, not hard to say. Because there is a lot of conflicting information and a lot of conflicting feelings about Cú Chulainn and perspective. And this is part of the difficulty we have when we look at Setanta Mac Súaltam, or as he would become more famously known, Cú Chulainn. So, ni answer, I suppose, not hard to say. No, he's not a tragic hero. He's a tragic figure, yes, but the word I have a problem with is actually hero. So the reason why we have to look at Cú Chulainn in a very interesting perspective is the fact that as a young kid growing up in school, reading the very first kind of exposure to Ireland's mythical histories, and I'm talking like at the first level, like you learn to read your ABCs, you learn to then read like, the child books that give you the sentence structure and grammatical forms about like, well, Barry likes jam and Anne likes lorries and whatever it is. But then after that, you begin to start your primary education in Ireland, which does include books about Irish history, but it's mythical history, but it's a mythical history that is presented for children. And that is where I first heard stories about Cú Chulainn. And so the stories we're given is the young kid who's like this amazing warrior who goes to join the king at a feast that he's late for because he was playing hurling like a good Irish kid playing hurling, and he gets attacked by a big monstrous dog and he kills the dog, and then he becomes Cú Chulainn, the hound of the smith Cullen. And that's the version of the story we're given. We're then told about like, how he stood up and he fought for Ireland or fought for Ulster against the rest of Ireland, and how he died heroically, like tied to a tree or a stone that no one would know he was actually dead. And so even dead, he kept the armies at bay, and it wasn't until a crow or raven landed on his shoulder that people knew he was dead. The figure of Cú Chulainn is so prominently, this narrative of Cú Chulainn is so prominently displayed that on the main street in Dublin, there's the General Post Office, and right there in the windows, there's a beautiful bronze statue of that moment of Cú Chulainn's demise. And it fits a certain narrative that we have as Irish people. This warrior spirit, this resilience to stand up, this, you know, against an overwhelming force, the willingness to still stand, to still fight, to never give in, and the willingness to, pay the ultimate sacrifice in service to your country or your land or your people. But there's another side to Cú Chulainn. And that is the part that I only learned later in life when I began my journey exploring Ireland's mythology for myself. When I got beyond the romanticized versions, when I got beyond the childhood fictions that I've been presented with, this idea that Cú Chulainn was some form of Irish superhero, this Superman, this, amazing figure who's able to run across the tops of spears, who's able to like hurl a ball from his like hurley and like fire it so fast it would kill a hound that he hit it with. Like there's so much that we're presented with as these amazing feats, but then when we take the step further into understanding Cú Chulainn, it's a lot darker than you may think. As a child, he is an absolute fucking nightmare. He is not in any way assisted, supported, or managed by his community. In fact, there's a lot of difficulty about his mother, Dextra, who is the sister of Concover, the king in Ulster. Instead of Cú Chulainn, or instead of the young boy Setanta being raised in Ern Macha, being raised amongst like the noble children, Dexter is set aside. She is married to Súaltam, and then she is kind of put away. And parts of this is because of the conception of the child who would be born as Setanta, because it's believed that there were three conceptions in order to try and get this child into the world. But one of those is a possible incestuous relationship with or abuse from Concover. Another is an otherworld influence where she falls asleep and a magical mist comes in. She wakes up the next day pregnant. And like there's a lot of difficulty around the birth of this pseudo semi-divine character who becomes Setanta, who becomes Cú Chulainn. But regardless of all of that, he himself becomes the epitome of the cultural expression that he is raised in. And this is where the tragic element comes into it because this child, this exuberant, energetic child, wants to go to Anmache. He's heard of this amazing stuff, and his mom is like, "No, you're too young. I'll bring you when you grow up." But because there's no support structures for her, the child just goes. But then this young child comes in and joins a game of hurling with the Machrad, which are all these noble children, and then starts to beat the shit out of all of them because he's physically superior to them, despite the fact that he's 5 years old. And this then turns into quite a bit of a mess, of which Concover is there to witness himself playing vehicle against Fergus, the former king of Ulster. And they pick up this small child. Fergus reaches in and just grabs this small child who's chasing all of these teen boys around. And he picks him up, and it's a little frenzied creature that he picks up. And eventually they sit him down, and Concover's like, "Well, who are you? Who are your people?" And then he declares himself that he is Setanta Mac Súaltam. He's Setanta, son of Súaltam, son of Decra. At which point Concover realizes, holy shit, this is my fucking nephew. Obviously not recognizing the child, despite the fact that there's a family kinship between them. So what carries on then for the young Setanta is training. Yeah, of course, he's accepted in. Great, you'll be trained, you'll be raised, you'll be schooled. And there's all of these promises. There's all of these promises that from the poets who'll training him in poetry, there's the Brehons who'll train him in justice. There's all of these kind of expectations that this child of great potential is going to be raised to be a paragon. He's going to be raised to be a most amazing. The one that he needs most, in my opinion, is actually Fergus, because everyone else is promising these great feats that they will raise this child in. Fergus is like, I'll give him discipline, because that's actually what he needed most. As the story continues, and this is where we get into the tragic elements of Setanta, in my personal opinion, Setanta is exposed to that culture, this martial culture, this very physical culture, where you're not just a product, or you're not just a person of your tribe, you're a product of your skill and your manipulation and what you can get away with and what you can kind of twist to your advantage, which Concover has actually made happen. He wasn't initially the king. It was his mother, Nessa, who came to Fergus and was like, "I'll be your wife for a year if you let my son be king for a year." And he's like, "Yeah, okay," because he fancied Nessa. But then Nessa straight away, once Concover was king, is like, "You take all of the wealth you have, give it to all of these people, and then when the year is over, you ask them who made you wealthy? Who do you want to keep as king?" And so Concover did, as his mom said, gave all the wealth to the upper echelons, the 1% of people, and then they advocated for him to stay as king. Not a hero. Not the Ulster Cycle is fraught with a lot of learning and a lot of teaching and a lot of information that we can take from. When I look at the moment and look across the water to another person self-styling themselves a king and making the wealthy people richer for endorsements, it's the same narrative. It's the same problem. And Concover was not the good guy in those stories because the Ulster Cycle centers around one main tale known as the Táin Bó Cúailnge, the cattle raid of Cooley, which comes into the conflict between Connacht, Queen Maven Connacht, and Concover in Ulster, all over rivalry and territory and wealth, to be honest. And Concover's not the good guy in that. As much as, Maeve rallies the armies of Ireland against Ulster, And Cuchulainn stands as the lone hero against the conflict. Concover's not the good guy. Time and again in all of the Ulster Cycle, he has set up and manipulated and twisted and changed how the world works to suit himself and those he deems of value to him. And that is where Setanta Mac Súaltam falls victim of that culture, of that toxicity. Instead of becoming this paragon of learned wisdom and virtue and excellence and amazingness, he becomes a paragon of brutality, of violence, of manipulation, of control, of dominion. And again, is it his fault? He's a product of how he is raised. As a kid, he's learning from Coffat, the druid, who, again, the Concover is actually born of Coffat, um, by Nessa. So there's a whole extra element. Once you begin to dig deep into the Ulster Cycle, stuff gets fucking crazy very quickly. But Coffat falls into a vision and is like, oh, the child who takes up arms today will be known forever. And he says this in front of the impetuous, like, vibrant, frenzied entity that is the Setanta Mac Súaltam. So he has to take up arms that day. This child who is not of age, this child who has no place, runs off to the king, who's his uncle, Concover, and is like, yep, Coffat said I have to take up arms today. And instead of Concover being like, okay, well, let's figure this out. Let's ask some logical questions. He's like, well, if Coffat said so. And then Cuchulainn goes into the armory, smashes the shit out of every single weapon that's in there because there's only one set of weapons and armor that will actually suit his semi-divine, frenzied, embodied nature. And that's the king's own chariot and weapons and everything. And so he comes out and Concover sees this kid wielding his own sword, spears, armor, and with his own chariot. But he's already promised the kid that, yeah, of course, go into the armory and take whatever works for you. What follows then is this joyride as this child takes the chariot and straight away leaves down Macha for the province of Connacht to go right to the borders because he's going to pick a fight. He's going to earn himself his blood name by taking heads day one. This is not the worst thing that he does. As time goes on, in order to win the most beautiful and fair and intellectual woman in all of Ulster, Emer, as his wife, he goes and he learns the greatest hero feats from the great warrior woman and trainer Scahach. But Scahach has one feat that she won't teach anyone. That's her own personal. She created this champion feat, this feat of skill that is hers and hers alone. Cuchulainn has to have all the feats. Cuchulainn has to be the best champion, the best of the best. So he sleeps with Scahach's daughter in order to find out how to take advantage of Scahach and when she's most vulnerable. So while she's bathing in the morning, nowhere near her swords, he puts her at sword point and demands the feat, demands that she teach him this feat. She acquiesces to save her life, but this trained in paragon of dominance, trained in paragon of violence, goes further and demands sex from Scahach. He's not a hero. He's absolutely not a hero. The person who becomes Cuchulainn, Setanta Mac Súaltam, to my mind, is a tragic child who's taken advantage of and manipulated by the culture in which he's raised, and all of these dominant individuals who see the power and potential of this child and manipulate it to their own ends. But when he becomes Cuchulainn, when he embraces that title, when he embraces that, takes on board his pursuit of becoming legend, when he takes on well, I'm going to be remembered down through the generations no matter what, he takes on the responsibility of everything he's doing. So no, he's not a hero. Later on, the child born of his union with Scahach's daughter comes to find him, comes to find his dad. But he's, again, this quasi-divine, violent, capable child who begins to beat the snot out of all of the warriors of Ulster. And he's capable of doing it as a young teenage boy. So much so that all of the warriors of Ulster turn up and they're all watching time and again as this child trounces them one after another, calls them out in a challenge, trounces them one after another. But he won't give his name. He won't say who he is. Until eventually Cú Chulainn decides that he's going to go down and fight him. And pulling out the nastiest of tricks, Cú Chulainn does kill this young warrior. At which point, when he's dying, the young warrior is now released from the gas or the prohibition on him, that he's able to then say who he is. And he tells Cú Chulainn who he is. He tells him that he is his son. At which point Cú Chulainn goes, yeah, I knew. Because there's no way you could have beaten anyone else. No way you couldn't have beaten all of them if you weren't my kid. The real twist of the blade, it was Cú Chulainn who'd actually set that gas on the child before the child was even born. When he heard about the child, he's like, yeah, it's going to be a son. When he's born, when he's ready, train him, send him to me in Ulster. I'll make sure he gets a seat with the king, but just make sure that he doesn't give up his name to anyone who he can't beat in a fight. He has to find his equal or his rival, guaranteeing the destruction of his own child. Cú Chulainn is not a hero. Setanta Mac Súaltam is a tragic figure. He is a paragon of the society. He was raised in a society of violence, a society of dominance and conquest and manipulation. Cú Chulainn is a product of that society. So it's difficult as an Irish person to see the statues, these beautiful remembrances of the hero Cú Chulainn, now that I know more, now that I know better. And the further difficulty is Cú Chulainn was used by Irish rebellions when we were conquered and still under the oppression of England. Cú Chulainn became a symbol of fighting against that oppression. He was used as this shining example of resilience, of denial, of standing up, of being willing to fight and die for a cause. And so many people in the Irish diaspora all around the world were exposed to a certain perspective, a certain propaganda piece that is Cú Chulainn. And people in Ulster on the island of Ireland are exposed to the propaganda piece that became Cú Chulainn. Which is why if you ever do have the privilege of traveling around Northern Ireland, you'll see artistic renderings of that statue, both for people who are nationalist and both for people who are royalists or loyalists, unionists. Crazy element is this paragon of, violence and resilience and willing to kill and die has been propped up and used by both sides of a conflict in Ulster, the upper province of my country. Still. So I could get off into history. I could ramble into so many different things. I actually went and I tried to explore as much as I could around Setanta Mac Súaltam. And that's why I'm trying to use the name before the title. Because that gives me a space to find pity for the child who could have been more. Who could have been amazing and brilliant had he just been raised in a better society, in a better culture. If you'd like to know more about Cú Chulainn, I did a full class on Cú Chulainn, A Life of Stories. It's available at the Irish Pagan School. I'll throw a link down the bottom where I pull out all of the stories of his boyhood deeds and his conquests and talk about his practice, his ability, his skills. I don't get into the full Tombo Cúailnge, but I do touch on the aspects that he is involved in and then the parts after that. So if you'd like to know as much as I could find about Cú Chulainn in a class, I think I think it ran for 3 hours. It's available there in the Irish Pagan School. But what I would leave you with is the thought that the story that we're presented with is never the full story. And if we're open-minded enough, if we're curious enough, if we're brave enough, we can find out more. We can go deeper, and we can learn a broader view and a deeper perspective on anything we are ever exposed to. Until next time, look after yourself, take care, agus slán. Goodbye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a positive review in your podcast listener. Then head over to irishpaganschool.com and enroll in one of our free or paid courses. Slán go fóill, and we will see you next time.